The neon sign of Murphy's Diner flickered against the rain-soaked pavement, casting fractured pink light across puddles that stretched like broken mirrors down the empty street. Elena pulled her worn jacket tighter, feeling the cold seep through fabric that had seen too many winters. Her shift had bled into 16 hours double tips, double exhaustion, the kind that settles deep into your bones and makes every step feel like wading through water. The city at 2 a.m. belonged to ghosts, and those too tired to be afraid of them. She was both. Her sneakers splashed through shallow water as she cut through the alley behind the Chinese restaurant, a shortcut she'd taken 1,000 times before, but tonight something made her pause. A sound faint, almost swallowed by the drum of rain on metal dumpsters, crying, not the drunken wail of someone stumbling home, but something smaller, more fragile, a child's whimper, broken and terrified. Elena's heart hammered as she moved deeper into the shadows, her phone's flashlight cutting through the fog. There, behind a row of trash bins slick with grease and decay, she found him. A boy no older than 6, barefoot and shivering in clothes too thin for the February night. His dark hair clung to his forehead, his eyes wide and glassy with fear. When the light hit his face, he flinched, pressing himself harder against the brick wall as if he could disappear into it. Hey, it's okay, Elena whispered, crouching low, making herself small. She'd learned this, working late nights, how to approach the frightened ones, the lost souls who wandered into the diner with nowhere else to go. I'm not going to hurt you. The boy said nothing. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. And then Elena saw them, the bruises. Dark purple shadows wrapped around his thin neck like fingerprints. A map of violence written on skin too young to bear such marks. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't a lost child who'd wandered from his parents. This was a child who'd been hurt, a child who'd run. She extended her hand slowly, palm up, the way you'd approach a wounded animal. Come with me. I have somewhere warm, food. You're safe. For a long moment, the boy just stared at her. Then, with movements so careful they broke her heart, he reached out and took her hand. His fingers were ice, cold, trembling. Elena wrapped her jacket around his shoulders and lifted him into her arms. He weighed almost nothing, all sharp angles and fragile bones. As she carried him out of that alley, she felt his small body relax against her chest, his breath evening out as exhaustion finally claimed him. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he'd come from, or what nightmare he was running from. But as she pushed open the door to her cramped studio apartment 3 blocks away, Elena made a choice that would shatter every safe, predictable piece of her ordinary life. She decided to keep him, just for tonight, just until morning, just until she figured out what to do. The apartment was small but clean, a single room divided by a bookshelf, a kitchenette in one corner, a bed with a patchwork quilt her grandmother had made. She laid the boy on the couch, covering him with every blanket she owned, watching his chest rise and fall in the rhythm of deep, desperate sleep. In the amber glow of her bedside lamp, he looked almost peaceful, almost safe. Elena sat on the floor beside him, her back against the couch, and let the exhaustion wash over her. Outside, the rain continued its endless percussion against the window. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed the city's lullaby, familiar and cold. She closed her eyes, not knowing that in the shadows beyond her door, something had already begun to move. Forces she couldn't see, couldn't understand, were converging on this moment, on this choice, on this fragile boy who'd found sanctuary in her arms. Morning light came too soon, gray and hesitant through thin curtains. Elena woke to the smell of her own fear, that sharp, metallic taste that sits on the back of your tongue when you know something's wrong. The boy was still asleep, curled into himself like a question mark, but outside her window, a black SUV idled at the curb. She'd lived in this neighborhood for 3 years and never seen that car before. 2 men in dark suits stood on the sidewalk, speaking to Mrs. Chen from the laundry across the street. Their body language was all wrong, too rigid, too purposeful. These weren't cops. Cops had a different energy, a bureaucratic weariness. These men moved like predators, patient and precise. One of them gestured toward her building. Mrs. Chen shook her head, hands moving in that universal gesture of I don't know anything, but her eyes flicked up toward Elena's window for just a fraction of a second. Elena's blood turned to ice water. She dropped to the floor, crawling to the window, peering out from below the sill. The boy Luca, he'd whispered his name in the night when nightmares woke him, stirred on the couch, but didn't wake. Her mind raced through impossible scenarios. Call the police and tell them what? That she'd taken a stranger's child home, that men in suits were asking questions. She'd look guilty, crazy, or both. Take him to a hospital. The doctors would call social services, and whatever hell this boy had escaped from would swallow him whole again. The men finished with Mrs. Chen and moved toward her building's entrance. Elena's hands shook as she pulled the curtains fully closed, plunging the apartment into artificial darkness. She scooped Luca up, blanket and all, and carried him to the small bathroom, the only room with a door that locked. She set him in the empty bathtub, whispering urgent instructions he was too drowsy to fully understand. Stay quiet, stay here, no matter what you hear. His eyes, fully awake now, went wide with terror. He'd seen these men before. She could read it in the way his whole body went rigid, in the way his breathing stopped. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't Elena's imagination running wild. This child knew exactly who was coming for him. A knock echoed through the apartment, 3 sharp raps that sounded more like a demand than a request. Elena closed the bathroom door, took 3 breaths to steady herself, and walked to her front door. Through the peephole she could see them, one tall and lean with a scar threading through his left eyebrow, the other shorter, broader, with hands that looked like they could break bones without effort. She opened the door just enough to show her face, keeping her body blocking the entrance. "Can I help you?" The tall one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, miss. We're sorry to bother you so early. We're looking for a young boy 6 years old, dark hair, might be frightened or confused. His family's very worried. You seen anyone like that around here?" Elena's throat felt like sandpaper, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "No, I work nights. Just got home a few hours ago. Haven't seen any kids." The shorter man leaned forward slightly, his gaze sliding past her into the apartment. She could feel him cataloging every detail, the single coffee cup on the counter, the couch still indented from where Luca had slept, the child-sized footprints on her bathroom tile floor that she hadn't thought to wipe away. "You live alone." It was the first lie that came easily. Boyfriends at work. Construction shift. The men exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. The tall one pulled out a business card, pressing it into her palm. "If you see anything, hear anything, you call this number. The family's offering a substantial reward. No questions asked." Elena took the card, her fingers numb. The number was handwritten, not printed. No company name, no logo, just 10 digits that felt like a noose tightening around her neck. "Sure, I'll keep an eye out." They lingered for another heartbeat, long enough to make their presence a threat, then turned and walked back down the hallway. Elena closed the door, locked it, slid the chain into place, and pressed her forehead against the cold wood. Her heart was a drum solo, wild and rhythmic. In the bathroom, she could hear Luca's quiet sobbing, the sound of a child who'd learned to cry without making noise. She had crossed a line. The moment she'd lied to those men, the moment she'd chosen this boy over her own safety, she'd stepped into a story she didn't understand. But as she opened the bathroom door and gathered Luca into her arms, feeling his small hands clutch at her shirt like she was the only solid thing in a world made of quicks, and Elena knew she'd do it again. She'd lie 100 times, 1,000, whatever it took to keep him safe. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the man who'd sent those suits, the man who'd been searching for this boy with the desperation of someone who'd already lost everything, was watching her apartment from a rooftop 3 blocks away. His name was Adrian Morty, and he'd just found the woman who would either save his son or destroy them all. 3 days passed in a kind of suspended terror. Elena called in sick to work, something she'd never done in 5 years. She kept the curtains drawn, living in perpetual twilight. Luca barely spoke, but he followed her everywhere from the kitchenette to the bathroom, a small shadow that flinched at every sound. She learned his rhythms, his fears, the way he'd wake screaming at 3 a.m. from nightmares he couldn't or wouldn't explain. She learned that he liked peanut butter sandwiches with the crusts cut off, that he could draw with startling skill, that when he smiled rare and fleeting, it transformed his whole face into something luminous. On the 4th day, someone knocked on her door at dusk, not the aggressive pounding of the suits, but something softer, more deliberate. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more, almost musical. Elena looked through the peephole and her breath caught. The man standing in her hallway didn't look like the thugs who'd come before. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her annual rent, perfectly tailored to a frame that was all lean muscle and contained power. His face was angular, almost severe, with dark eyes that held the kind of weariness that comes from seeing too much, surviving too much. A thin scar traced his jawline like a signature. He stood with the stillness of someone accustomed to violence, but too disciplined to show it. "Elena Morno," he said, his voice carrying through the door like smoke. "I know you're listening, I know you're afraid, I'm not here to hurt you, I'm here about my son." Luca, who'd been coloring at the kitchen table, went absolutely rigid. The crayon fell from his hand, rolling across the floor with a sound like thunder. His eyes found Elena's, wide and pleading and full of something that looked like betrayal. "Don't open it," they said. "Please don't open it." But Elena's hand was already on the deadbolt. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the inevitability of this moment, the sense that she'd been hurtling toward it since the second she'd found Luca in that alley. Maybe it was something in the man's voice, not a threat, but a kind of broken honesty that matched the ache in her own chest. She opened the door. Adrian Morty stepped inside, and the apartment seemed to shrink around his presence. He didn't move aggressively, didn't reach for a weapon, or make any sudden gestures. Instead, his eyes went immediately to Luca, and something in his expression cracked. Raw emotion flooded through relief, grief, love so fierce it was almost violent. "Luca," the boy pressed himself against Elena's legs, his small hands fisting in her jeans. "No, no, I won't go back, I won't." Adrian's face contorted, and for just a moment Elena saw past the suit, past the dangerous competence, to the man underneath. He looked devastated. "I'm not taking you back there, son. I promise. I'm taking you home, where you belong, where you're safe. Liar." Luca's voice broke on the word. "You're just like them. You'll lock me up again. I will kneel on broken glass before I let anyone hurt you again." Adrian's voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of an oath. He slowly lowered himself to one knee, making himself smaller, less threatening. His eyes never left his son's face. "What they did to you, what my brother did to you, I will spend the rest of my life making it right. But I need you to trust me. One more time." Elena's mind raced to catch up. "Brother, this wasn't a kidnapping by enemies or rivals. This was family turning on family, a fracture in the foundation she couldn't begin to understand." She looked between father and son, seeing the mirror of pain in both their faces, and realized she was standing at the center of something ancient and blood-soaked. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "What are you?" Adrian's eyes shifted to her, and she saw him truly see her for the first time, not an obstacle, not a complication, but a woman who'd risked everything for a child that wasn't hers. Someone who owes you more than I can ever repay, and someone who's about to ask you to risk even more." Before Elena could respond, before she could demand answers, or throw him out, or do any of the sensible things screaming in her head, the window exploded inward. Glass shattered in a crystalline wave, and the world dissolved into chaos. Gunfire ripped through the apartment, splintering wood, punching holes in plaster, destroying the small sanctuary she'd built. Adrian moved with inhuman speed, throwing himself over Luca and Elena, driving them to the floor as bullets carved the air above their heads. "Back door," he shouted over the roar. "Is there a back door? Fire escape." Elena crawled toward the window on the opposite wall, dragging Luca with her, glass cutting her palms, her knees. Adrian returned fire with a pistol that seemed to materialize from nowhere, buying them seconds. The shooters were in the building across the street, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness like deadly fireflies. They crashed through the window onto the fire escape, the metal railing cold and slick with rain. Adrian came last, moving backward, still firing, and then they were descending into the alley below, feet clanging on rusted metal, the sound of pursuit echoing above them. A black sedan screeched to a stop at the alley's mouth, and Elena's heart seized another ambush. They were trapped, but Adrian shoved them inside. "Drive." He barked at the man behind the wheel, and the car launched forward with enough force to slam Elena against the seat. Luca was in her lap, shaking so hard his teeth chattered, and Adrian was twisted around, watching through the rear window as more vehicles joined the chase. The city blurred past neon signs, red lights they didn't stop for, pedestrians diving out of the way. Adrian's driver wove through traffic with the precision of someone who'd done this 100 times before, but the pursuers stayed close. Too close. A bullet spider-webbed the back windshield, and Adrian cursed in Italian, something guttural and vicious. "Who are they?" Elena demanded, her voice hoarse with adrenaline and terror. "My brother's men. They want Luca as leverage. If they have him, they control me, control the family, control everything." Adrian's jaw was tight, his knuckles white where he gripped the door handle. "They won't stop. Not until one of us is dead." The car took a hard right, tires screaming, and suddenly they were on a bridge, the river black and churning below. Their pursuers closed in from both sides, boxing them in, and Elena realized with sickening clarity that this was it. This was where it ended. She held Luca tighter, whispering things she didn't remember, prayers she didn't believe in. Then Adrian made a choice. He grabbed the driver's headrest and yanked hard, sending the car into a controlled spin. They rotated 180 degrees, now facing their attacker's head. On, and Adrian leaned out the window, firing with both hands. His first shot took out the lead car's tire. It swerved, clipped the bridge railing, and went airborne, spinning through the night before crashing into the river with a sound like the end of the world. The other vehicles scattered, retreating, and Adrian's driver floored it in the opposite direction. They drove for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Silence thick in the car except for Luca's quiet sobbing and Elena's ragged breathing. Blood ran down Adrian's arm where a bullet had grazed him, soaking through his shirt, dripping onto the leather seat. He didn't seem to notice. When they finally stopped, it was in front of a gate hidden by overgrown ivy, the kind of entrance you'd miss if you didn't know to look for it. Beyond lay a gravel drive that wound through ancient oak trees, their branches forming a tunnel of shadows. At the end sat a villa not ostentatious, but elegant, all stone and dark windows, and the kind of quiet that comes from being far from the world's noise. Adrian carried Luca inside, and Elena followed because there was nowhere else to go. Her apartment was destroyed. Her life as she'd known it was shattered like that window, irreparable. She was in this now, all the way in, whether she wanted to be or not. The villa's interior was warm, all exposed beams and leather furniture, and a fireplace that crackled with real wood. Adrian laid Luca on a couch, checking him for injuries with hands that trembled slightly the first crack in his armor. When he was satisfied his son was whole, he finally looked at Alina, really looked at her. His eyes held questions, gratitude, guilt, and something else she couldn't name. "You should hate me," he said quietly. "I destroyed your life tonight." Alina touched her bleeding palms together, feeling the sting, the proof that this was real. "You saved it. Those men would have killed me for helping him. They still might. Then I guess we're in this together." The words came out before she could stop them, before she could think about how insane they were. But standing there in the firelight, watching this dangerous man kneel beside his sleeping son with such desperate tenderness, Alina realized she meant it. Somehow, impossibly, she'd become part of this story. And she wasn't walking away. Adrian studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then let me tell you everything, who I am, what we're fighting, and why my brother wants my son dead." The story he told her that night, in the quiet hours while Luca slept, was one of legacy and betrayal, of an empire built on blood, and the fractures that threatened to bring it all down. Adrian was the eldest son of the Morty family, inheritor of territory, operations, and loyalties that stretched back 3 generations. His brother, Marco, had always been the ambitious one, the one who saw Adrian's reluctance to embrace the family's darker edges as weakness. When Adrian's wife died 2 years ago, not an accident, Adrian now knew, but an orchestrated hit. Marco had made his move. The power struggle had been quiet at first, fought in boardrooms and backroom deals. But then Marco had taken Luca, holding him in a compound under the guise of protection, while slowly poisoning the boy against his father. The bruises on Luca's neck, from the night he'd tried to escape, when Marco's men had dragged him back and made an example. Adrian had been frantic, using every resource to find his son, until 3 nights ago when Luca had finally succeeded in running, and run straight into Alina's arms. "He thinks I'm a monster," Adrian said, staring into the fire. "My own son is afraid of me because Marco spent months telling him I was the one who killed his mother, telling him I'd do the same to him if he didn't behave." Alina's throat tightened. She thought of Luca's terror, his nightmares, the way he'd clung to her like she was the only safe harbor in a storm. "You have to show him the truth, not tell him, show him." How? The question was raw, helpless. By being his father, by being patient, by letting him see who you really are when no one's trying to use him as a weapon. She moved to sit beside Adrian on the couch opposite Luca's, exhaustion making her bold. "You want to know what I see? I see a man who took bullets for his kid tonight, who didn't hesitate. That's not a monster, that's a father." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a thawing of the ice that had encased him. "You barely know us. You could have walked away at any point. Why didn't you?" Alina looked at Luca, at his small form curled under a blanket too big for him, and remembered the feeling of his cold hand in hers that first night. "Because when I was 9, I was him. Different circumstances, but the same fear, same hopelessness, and no one came, no one stopped to help. I promised myself if I ever got the chance, I'd be the person I needed back then." The silence between them was different now, not heavy with danger, but charged with understanding. Adrian reached out, his blood-stained hand covering hers, and the warmth of the contact sent electricity up her arm. "Thank you," he said, and the words carried the weight of everything unsaid. The days that followed had a strange, suspended quality, like living inside a snow globe. The villa became a world unto itself, mornings spent making breakfast while Luca watched cartoons. Afternoons where Adrian taught his son chess and Alina read by the window. Evenings around the dinner table that felt almost like a family. Slowly, carefully, Luca began to thaw. He laughed at Adrian's terrible jokes, let his father carry him upstairs when he fell asleep on the couch, started calling him Papa again instead of Sir. And Alina watched it all, this careful reconstruction of trust, feeling something dangerous bloom in her chest. She saw Adrian in the early mornings, making coffee before the sun rose, shadows under his eyes from nights spent on guard. Saw the way he'd check every lock, every window, the pistol never far from reach, but always hidden from Luca's sight. Saw the gentleness in him, the way he'd read bedtime stories in a voice that could command empires but softened to velvet for his son. One night after Luca was asleep, Adrian found her on the terrace overlooking the property's gardens. The moon was full, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. "Can't sleep?" he asked, offering her a glass of wine. "Too quiet," Elena admitted. "I'm used to sirens, shouting neighbors, the city. You miss it. I miss knowing who I was." She took the wine, their fingers brushing. 3 weeks ago, I was a waitress who read romance novels and dreamed of saving enough for community college. Now I'm, what, an accomplice, a fugitive. Adrian leaned against the stone railing, his profile sharp in the moonlight. "You're the woman who saved my son's life, who gave me a chance to be his father again. That's who you are. And when this is over, when Marco's dealt with and Luca's safe, what happens to the waitress then?" He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Maybe she realizes she was never just a waitress. Maybe she sees that she's brave and fierce, and the kind of person who runs toward danger when someone needs help. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Maybe she lets herself want something more than survival. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. She barely knew this man. He was dangerous, complicated, tied to a world that had nearly killed them. But when he leaned in, when his lips met hers in a kiss that tasted like wine and promise, and all the reckless hope she'd been trying to suppress, she didn't pull away. She kissed him back, pouring 3 weeks of terror and tenderness and impossible connection into the contact. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "This can't happen," he whispered. "I can't put you in more danger than you're already in." "Too late," Elena replied, her hands fisted in his shirt. "I'm already here, already in this, so stop trying to protect me from choices I've already made." The phone rang inside, shrill and urgent, shattering the moment. Adrian's expression hardened instantly, the tender man replaced by the one who'd fired shots from a moving car. He strode inside, Elena following, and answered with a curt, "What?" She watched his face change as he listened, watched the color drain, the muscles in his jaw lock. When he hung up, his eyes found hers, and she saw the truth before he spoke it. "They found us. Marco knows where we are. The betrayal came from within. One of Adrian's own men, someone he'd trusted for years, had sold their location for a promotion in Marco's regime. They had maybe an hour before the assault came, maybe less." Adrian moved through the villa like a soldier, checking weapons, closing shutters, turning their sanctuary into a fortress. But Elena could see the calculation in his eyes, the grim math. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and Marco would have no mercy this time. "There's a tunnel," Adrian told her, pressing a set of keys into her palm. "In the wine cellar. It leads half a mile into the woods. Cars waiting there. Take Luca. Drive to the address on this paper." He handed her a folded note. "People there will keep you safe." Elena stared at the keys, at the note, at Adrian's face. "What about you? I'm staying. I can hold them off long enough for you to get clear." "That's not a plan, that's suicide." His smile was sad, almost peaceful. "Maybe, but it's the only way you both survive, and that's all that matters." Luca appeared in the doorway, sleep, rumpled and confused, clutching a stuffed bear Adrian had given him days before. "Papa, what's happening?" Elena made a decision. She grabbed Adrian's arm, her grip fierce. "No. We're not splitting up. We're not sacrificing anyone. We're getting out together, or we're making a stand together." But I didn't keep your son alive for 3 weeks, just to watch you throw your life away now." Something blazed in Adrian's eyes: surprise, admiration, maybe even love. He looked at Luca, then back at Alina, and she saw him choose not martyrdom, not sacrifice, but hope. The terrifying, impossible hope that they might all survive this. Together, he agreed. They took the tunnel, all 3 of them, moving through the darkness with only a flashlight to guide them. The air was close, smelling of earth and age, and Luca held Alina's hand so tight her fingers went numb. Behind them, the sound of vehicles, shouting, the first crack of gunfire as Marco's men breached the villa. But they were already gone, already running through the woods toward the hidden car, branches whipping their faces, lungs burning. They almost made it. The ambush came at the tree line, 3 men, guns raised, cutting off their escape. Marco himself stepped from the shadows, and the resemblance to Adrian was striking and sickening. Same height, same build, but where Adrian's eyes held depth, Marco's were flat, predatory. "Brother," Marco said, the word dripping contempt. "Did you really think you could hide him forever? Hide her?" His gaze slid to Alina, appraising and cold. The little hero. Marco's men moved to flank them, and Adrian shifted, putting himself between the guns and his family. Because that's what they'd become, Alina realized. In these strange, violent weeks, they'd become a family. "You can't have him," Adrian said, his voice deadly calm. "I'll burn our entire legacy to ash before I let you touch my son again." Marco laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Legacy? You gave up on legacy when you went soft. When you started talking about going legitimate, cutting ties with the old ways. Father would be ashamed. Father was a tyrant who raised us to be weapons. I won't do that to Luca. This ends tonight." The standoff held for a heartbeat, the forest around them silent as if the world was holding its breath. Then Marco's hand moved toward his gun, and everything exploded. Adrian fired first, dropping one of the flanking men. Return fire lit up the darkness, and Alina grabbed Luca, diving behind a fallen log, covering his body with hers. She could hear Adrian moving, the steady rhythm of his shots, the thud of bodies hitting ground. But there were too many. Even as Adrian fought with lethal precision, she could see him taking hits shoulder, leg, blood blooming dark against his clothes. He stumbled, went down on one knee, and Marco advanced, gun raised for the kill shot. Alina didn't think. She erupted from behind the log, a rock clutched in her hand, and swung with everything she had. It connected with Marco's temple with a sickening crack. He went down, dazed, and his gun skittered across the forest floor. Adrian surged forward, despite his wounds, and pressed his own weapon to his brother's head. "Give me one reason," Adrian gasped, blood on his lips. "One reason I shouldn't end this now." Marco smiled, even with a gun to his skull. "Because you're not a killer anymore. That's why you'll lose. That's why I'll always—" The sirens cut through the night police, close and getting closer. Someone had called in the gunfire. Adrian's hand shook, the weight of the choice crushing him. Kill his brother and become the monster Marco said he was, or let him live and risk everything again. Alina's voice cut through the chaos, soft but certain. "You're not a killer. You're a father. Don't let him take that from you." Adrian looked at her, at Luca peeking out from behind the log, at the life they could have if he chose differently. And slowly, he lowered the gun. "You're done," he told Marco. "I'm giving everything to the FBI. Every ledger, every contact, every dirty secret. By morning, the Morty Empire won't exist, and you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell." They left Marco there, hands zip, tied with Adrian's belt, for the police to find. They staggered to the car, Adrian barely conscious, Alina driving with shaking hands while Luca held his father's hand in the back seat, whispering, "Stay with me, Papa. Please stay." The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and urgent voices. Adrian went straight into surgery, and Alina and Luca waited in the hallway that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Hours crawled by. Luca fell asleep against her shoulder, exhausted beyond measure. and Elena stared at the wall and made bargains with a god she wasn't sure she believed in. When the surgeon finally emerged, his scrub speckled with blood, Elena couldn't breathe. "He's stable. Lucky. The bullets missed everything vital. He'll need time to heal, but he'll recover." Elena's legs gave out. She slid down the wall to sit on the cold linoleum floor, Luca still sleeping against her, and let the tears come. They'd survived. Impossibly, miraculously, they'd survived. 2 weeks later, Adrian checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice. The FBI had his testimony, his evidence. Marco and 24 others were arrested in coordinated raids across the city. The Morty name, once spoken with fear and respect, became a cautionary tale. And Adrian, his arm in a sling, his steps still careful, walked away from it all. Elena found him at the cemetery on a gray afternoon, standing before a white marble headstone. She didn't speak, just stood beside him, and after a moment his good hand found hers. "I'm telling her about you," Adrian said quietly. "About the woman who saved our son, who saved me." Elena squeezed his hand. "What happens now?" "I don't know. I've never lived a normal life. Don't know if I even can." "Then we'll figure it out together. You, me, and Luca. One day at a time." He turned to face her, and despite the scars, despite the lingering shadows in his eyes, she saw something new there. Peace, the fragile hard, one piece of someone who'd fought through hell and found their way home. "One day at a time," he echoed. They walked back to the car where Luca waited, drawing in a notebook Adrian had given him. When he saw them, he scrambled out, running to Elena with arms outstretched. She caught him, lifted him, and felt his small arms wrap around her neck. "Mama," he whispered, the word tentative, testing it out. "Is that okay? Can I call you that?" Elena's vision blurred with tears. She looked at Adrian, saw the emotion raw on his face, and nodded. "Yeah, baby. You can call me that." The three of them stood there in the cemetery parking lot, a broken mafia prince, an ordinary waitress turned extraordinary, and a boy who'd survived the worst to find love on the other side. They were battered, scarred, stitched together from fractured pieces, but they were whole. As they drove away, the city skyline emerging in the distance, Elena thought about that night in the alley. How one choice, one moment of compassion, had unraveled her entire existence and rewoven it into something unrecognizable and precious. She'd risked everything for a lost boy, and in saving him, she'd saved herself. The story could have ended in a dozen different ways, in blood, in tragedy, in the kind of darkness that swallows people whole. But instead, it ended here, in the quiet afternoon light, driving toward a future uncertain but no longer alone. Sometimes salvation doesn't come from strength or power. Sometimes it comes from a woman too tired to be afraid, from a father desperate enough to choose love over legacy, from a child brave enough to run toward hope instead of away from fear. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is the simplest. You stop, you listen, you reach out your hand, and you refuse to let go.